Hi, this is Chong Kim, and today we're going to write a C extension to Ruby. We're going to start off by writing FizzBuzz. FizzBuzz is a very simple program that if you give it a number like 1, it'll return back 1, and if you give it a number that's a multiple of 3, it'll say fizz. If it's a multiple of 5, it'll say buzz, and if it's a multiple of 3 and 5, then it'll say FizzBuzz. So we'll start off by making a test. So go in here and we have to first create our gem file, and we need RSpec, we need guard, and we need the plugin RSpec for guard and guard shell. Run the bundle so it'll install everything. While that's going on, I'm going to create the directory spec and lib. In the spec directory, we're going to start with FizzBuzz spec, start with a test. Okay, so our first test is if we pass it, it returns 1 for 1. So if we give it fizz of 1, we expect that it should just return 1. And we need to run guard. Oh, we need to initialize guard init. Oh, and before we run the guard, let's take a look at the guard file. There's a lot of stuff in here that we don't need, so I'll get rid of it. We don't need the Rail stuff or capybara. Okay, so start off like this. So this first line says that if the spec file changes, then run RSpec on that file. This one says look in the lib directory for RB files. Now, in our case, the code that we're going to be writing is going to be in C, and so it's going to look for bundle, which is the compiled version of it. And okay, so we're just going to have the spec in the spec directory, not the spec lib directory. And for the shell, it's going to look for C or H files, and the command it'll run is it's going to cd into that directory and run make. So our guard file should be ready now, so we run guard. And let's go back to the FizzBuzz. See, let me just get rid of this since we don't need that anymore. And we don't need the guard file in our buffer, so okay. So we have FizzBuzz. Save it, and that should trigger the guard, and we get our first error, undefined method fizz. So we're going to import require from lib FizzBuzz. Okay, and this file doesn't exist, so we'll get an error. Can't load such file. Okay, so we're going to start creating it. In our lib directory, we need to create a file called extconf.rb. Now, to start this off, if you want to get a good background on what you need to get started, you need to read this file called readme.ext. And this should come with your Ruby installation. So here is where, here's one version of it. They're all probably the same. So this gives you all the instructions on how to create and use the C extension. So there are some API information about how to concatenate a string. And there's a bunch of information here, and I think that if you're interested in learning how to write extensions, you have to read this file. A lot of good stuff. Okay, so assuming that you have read that, the instructions say to require mkmf, and this is to create a makefile. The simplest thing to do is just say create makefile and give it your function, the file name. So we'll call it FizzBuzz. Okay. All right. So once you have this extconf file, you just run it. So in my lib directory, I say ruby extconf, and it created the make file. So let's, since we don't have any source code for it to compile, let's create our first one. It'll be a very simple one. We'll call it, the file is going to be fizzbuzz.c, and okay, the return type is going to be a value. The function name, we're going to call it fizz. The argument, the first argument is going to be self, and the second argument, since Ruby is an object-oriented language, self is pretty much required for the first argument, and the real argument starts over here. It's starting from the second position, so it'll be the n value. And right now we'll just return a nil, and so this is how you specify a nil to Ruby. You start with a q and nil. Okay, we also need to require the include the ruby.h, so we have access to all of these value and the q nil. Okay, save that, and we take a look. We have everything we need to run the makefile, so we can run it now. Okay, let's run the ruby extconf again. Okay, now run make. Okay, so now it compiled it and it created a fizzbuzz.bundle. And this is what Ruby will require. Okay, so it still has an error. Actually, if I run it again, it has an error, and you can see what the error message says. It says that it's missing init fizzbuzz, and that's a requirement when you're creating a bundle. You need to have the init. So this is to, once it's loaded, this is the code that gets that initializes it. So init fizzbuzz, and takes no arguments, and the code is rb define global function. Okay, there are other methods other functions that you can use that would create classes and put the methods in different places. But for now, we'll just make this a global function, and you give it the name that you want it to be associated with, and you pass in the function. The third argument is the number of arguments. There's just one. So this should be all you need. So I saved this file, and let's take a look, and now it ran. So it's able to load it, and it's got its first error. Expected 1 but got nil, and that's because we're returning a nil. So let's make this pass. So I'm going to split this window so that you can see the test at the top, and then I'll write the code at the bottom here. All right, so now that we have this pretty much connected, we'll just return a 1. There's a macro called int to num, and that converts an integer into a Ruby numeric value. So 1. So we'll pass it a 1. So we save, it runs, and it passed. So our next one is it returns 2 for 2. So fizz of 2 should equal 2. And that didn't pass. That's because we hard-coded the 1. So instead of a 1 here, I can give it the value that was passed in. So I'm actually going to do it in 2 steps. I could just put n value in here. Actually, let me just do that first, and this should pass. It passed. If I save it again, you could see that it passed for both 1 and 2. But I'm going to convert it into an int first. So that would be num to int, which is to go the other direction, and value. And then I could just say int to num for, oops, I meant int n is equal to that. Okay. All right, so that still passes. The reason why is because I need to know the value of n. So I write if n is equal to 3. Oh, actually, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I didn't write the next test. The next test is 3. Okay, so it returns fizz. Actually, I don't need the quotes. It returns fizz for 3. So that should be the string fizz. And it fails. So it got a 3 instead. So I handle a special case. I say if n is equal to 3, then I'm going to return the string Ruby string new 2 of fizz. All right, so let's see if that makes it pass. And that passed. Okay, so let's do the next one, which would be 5. And for 5, should be buzz. Okay, and that failed. So we do the same thing. So if n equals 5, then it's going to be buzz. And that passes. Let me save one more time, and it runs everything. So far, so good. All right, but it's supposed to be multiples of 3 or 5. So it should return fizz when we give it 6. See if that passes. That doesn't pass. That's because we're only testing for 3. If we want to see if it's a multiple of 3, we can get the remainder after dividing by 3 and compare it to 0. So if the remainder is 0 after you divide by 3, then we know it's a multiple of 3. Okay, so that passes. Do the same thing for 5. All right, so we do the same thing. Okay, and we also have that other condition, which is it's going to be FizzBuzz for 15. Or multiples of 15. All right. All right. Just to make sure that it is for multiples of 15, we'll do it for 30, and that passed. So everything works out, and you now have a program. This is written in C, and this is written in Ruby, and they're now connected through this C interface. Okay, so let me do another kata. It's going to be the coin changer, and instead of using integers and strings, it uses let me just get out of here. Okay, lists. So you could see how that's used. It's a slightly more complicated kata. So let me make a coin changer and do the same thing. So we need the RSpec, we need the guard, we need the guard RSpec, and guard shell. So we're doing the same thing. We do the bundle, we make the directory spec and lib, and start off in the spec directory with coin spec. All right. So the first test should be it gives it converts 0 cents to empty list. Okay, so if I give it a coin of 0, that should equal an empty list. And we do the require lib coin, and in the lib directory we create the extconf file, require the make file, and create make file, and this time it'll be called coin. Okay, let's create the C file first. So it'll be coin.c. So let's start with including the ruby.h to get started, and the function is going to be returning a value. The name is going to be coin. Value, the first argument is the self, and the second argument is the amount. So amount, I'll call this amount value. And for now, we'll just return a qnil. Okay, remember we also need to have the init function, init coin, and what that'll do is it'll expose coin to Ruby. RB define global function. It's going to be called coin. The function is coin, and it takes 1 argument. Okay, so we're set. So we need to go to the lib directory under coin and run the Ruby file, the extconf. That created the make file, so this is what you should have. Then you run make, and you can see that it created the coin bundle. Okay, so let's run guard. So it can, oh, actually we need to do a guard init and edit the guard file. So we do the same thing here. Leave the spec alone. The lib is looking for the bundle now instead of the RB. And the spec file is located in the spec directory, not the spec lib. And for the shell, we're just looking for CNH files. And we do the same thing. CD into the lib and just run make. All right, so now the guard file should be ready. We run guard. We'll go back to here and save, trigger everything. And so we got our first, seeing this failure is a good thing, means everything is working. All right, so let's make this pass. So there is a function called RB array new, and that should create an empty list. So that made it pass. Let me split this so that you can see the spec. Okay, so that was the first test, passed. Okay, so the next one is converts 1 cent to a penny. So if I pass in a 1, that should just give me a penny. And this should fail. All right, so let's make that pass. We just put an if condition here saying that if the amount, and then we'll just do the conversion. So int amount is equal to num2int of the amount value. And if the amount is equal to 1, then return array new let's see, I forget which, there's different versions of new. And so a good way is actually looking at that ext file, and let's take a look at the different kinds of new. So I think the one that we want, well, this one looks pretty good. New 3 creates an n element array from the arguments. Okay, that sounds pretty good. So let's try that. So new 3, it starts off with the length, so it's going to be 1. And what am I going to put in there? I am going to put in the value. So it'll be int to num of 1. Okay, so let's see if this passes. Okay, so it looks like it didn't pass. Let's try it again. Okay, it passed. Okay, so we have this part working. Now let's go to 2 cents. Okay, so that should be converts 2 cents to 2 pennies. Okay, we have a failure, and I'm going to modify this so that it's actually, let me do it the other way around. So if the amount is greater than or equal to 1, then I'm going to run this piece of code, but it's still wrong. Something interesting here is going on. It's compiling, but it's not triggering the. Let me do that. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, it wasn't triggering the other one. Okay, I think there's something a little bit buggy about guard in the new release, because I didn't used to have this type of problem. Okay, so in this case, what I want to do is I want to take the existing value of whatever it was previously. So if it was 2, then I want to say, okay, so what I want to do is, for the array, I want to unshift into the result. So the result is, if I do a coin of self and the, I have to do the conversion, so it's into num of the amount minus 1. Okay, so what this does is, I know it works for 1 cent, but if I come here with 2, then I'm going to subtract 1, and this will return me a list, which is correct because we know it passed the previous test. But once we have that, we're going to unshift. In other words, put another integer into that list. Okay. All right. So let's see if it should line up like this. So into the result of the previous call, I am going to just add a 1. So let's see how that works. Okay, so it passed. All right, so just to check, let's see what happens with 3 cents. And that also passes. So let's do something, the next step, which is for a nickel. Start with the failing test. So it converts 5 cents to 1 nickel. So instead of all these 1s, we should see a 5. Okay, that fails. So Okay, I'm just going to put this in one line. Okay. All right. So actually, because of the wrapping, I'll just leave it like this. Okay. Okay, so now if I do 5, basically I just change all this into a 5 here. Okay, so this will give me the result after I subtract 5. In this case, it would be an empty list. So I'm going to put into the empty list a 5. Okay, and that passed. All right, so let's see what happens if we do 6 cents now. 6 cents, so that should be 1 nickel, 1 penny. And that passes. Okay, so let's do a dime. So the way I have this set up, it's pretty easy to just make the modifications. Just change all these to 10. All right, so, oh, actually, I didn't write the test for 10 cents. So 10 cents should be a dime. Okay, that worked. So 11 cents should be 1 dime and 1 penny. And that passes. Let's try 16 cents. So that would be 1 dime, 1 nickel, and 1 penny. So we'll just add a 5 over here for 16. So let's see if that works. Okay, so it works for all of these things, and the last part would be for a quarter. So that's 25 cents. Oh, I forgot to write the test first. So, well, just to show you what it was supposed to be like. Okay, so 25 cents should be 1 quarter. Right? It should start out with a failing test. And now I'm going to uncomment the code. Okay, and that passed. So let's try 26. Well, let's try something a little bit more like 70, about 87 cents. Okay, so that should be 3 quarters. Okay, so that leaves us with 12 cents, so 1 dime and 2 pennies. So 87 cents should be 3 quarters, 1 dime, and 2 pennies. So 75, 85, 87. And that passes. So we can actually go into here and just put it into a loop. So we could say 100 times do I put S, that amount goes to wrong kata, coin of I. All right, so let's see how it looks. So far, everything looks good here. So 60 cents is 2 quarters and a dime. So this is how you can use C and Ruby together.